Maybe it's perspective. Maybe it's understanding the other one's point of view. And that's, we're going to be continuing our study in Job, and it's about Job's perspective and his friends. Little review. Okay, this is all a quick review of what we did last week. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless, upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. So what do we know so far? Where is he from? Uz. What's his name? What are his 4 characteristics? Okay, and he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. He had 10 children. We switch from Job up into the meeting with God and the sons of God. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him who on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" Does that sound familiar? That was our first description of Job in verse 1, right? Satan claims ownership of the earth and all its inhabitants. But the Lord said, "Wait a minute. Have you considered Job?" So what happened to Job after this confrontation between the Lord and Satan? What happened to all that Job owned? It was all taken away. What happened to his children? They were killed, right? Okay. After this, what did Job do? In all this, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. Did Job get upset? Did he blame God? So after everything was taken away, and what was Satan's charge to God anyways? The only reason that he's worshiping you, he's following you, he's good to you, that he's a good guy, he's blameless down on earth, is because all the things you've given him. Satan comes back, round 2. We're going to go fast here just to get up to speed. So everything was taken away from Job, other than what? His health. God said during the first round that, you can't touch his health. So what does Satan accuse God of doing? Well, hey, he's still worshiping you because you may have taken away his stuff, but he still has his health. That's why he's still following you. Someone you want to read?
And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head.
What happened to Job? Infested is a good word there, Dave. He was infested with boils. Anybody have a boil in their life? Very painful for one. He had them from his feet to his head. I don't think we can describe how actually bad it was for Job here. This is about where we left off last week. So Job has been sitting in the ash heap for a little while here. It takes a while for the news to get out that Job is in the condition he's in, with everything gone. He's got this health problem. The 3 friends gather together, and they come, and what do? They sit with him for a week. So they sit with Job for a full week without saying a word. What does that show? Have you ever tried to console someone and you don't have the words to say it? This is where they're at. They're like, we don't know what to say to this man. Here's a question. Does God's justice mean that he rewards and or punishes people based on their behavior? This is kind of the whole thesis of Job and what's going on here. There's this running back and forth about God and his justice and how he treats people. So here's a question for us. I don't know if anyone has an answer, but does God's justice mean that he rewards and or punishes people based on their behavior? Okay. We're going to try to answer that question today. So this terrible event has gone on in Job's life. He's lost his basically all his wealth. He's lost his children. He's lost his health. And his three friends show up to basically help Job. And we're going to go through what they were going through. So they sat with Job for how many days? They sat with Job for 7 days in quietness without saying a word until at last Job spoke and he cursed the day of his birth. Okay. Did Job sin at this point? How bad was it for Job that he had to, he decried the day that he was born, that he wished he were dead? What's the worst thing that's happened to you, and how did you react? Job cursed the day of his birth, and he wished he was dead. Then he tells his friends his point of view. I have no peace, no quietness, I have no rest, only trouble comes. For he attacks, who's the he here? For he attacks me with a storm and repeatedly wounds me without cause. Now this is Job explaining to his friends his point of view, his side of the tennis ball, as it were. He's saying God is attacking him, and God, verse 18, will not let me catch my breath, but fills me instead with bitter sorrows. Is Job complaining? Or is he explaining what he sees? So who does he blame? Not blame, or who does he accuse of what's going on in his life? Because what were the four characteristics of Job? He was blameless. He shunned evil. He feared God. So he had all these things going for him. But so when bad comes in your life, where does it come from? Well, Job believed that God was bringing these things upon him for no reason. Job says here in chapter 10, verse 2 and 3, I will say to God, don't simply condemn me. Tell me what charge you're bringing against me. In other words, Job's looking for justice here, isn't he? He's trying to figure out why these things have happened to him. Verse 3, what do you gain by oppressing me? Why do you reject me, the work of your own hands, while smiling on the schemes of the wicked? Is Job sinning yet? What's he accusing God of here? Why do you reject me, the work of your hands, while smiling on the schemes of the wicked? And he's still talking to God here. If I have sinned, what have I done to you, O watcher of all humanity? Why make me your target? Am I a burden to you? What is Job trying to say? This is kind of a summary of what Job's going through. He says, I'm blameless. I can't look at anything I've done in my life that would cause these sort of conditions. So he says, my suffering is not divine justice because, again, based on the idea that God rewards the good and punishes the evil, he doesn't understand he's suffering. So his conclusions are either one of two things, either that God doesn't run the world according to justice or God is unjust. What is wrong with Job's thinking at this point? His limited knowledge of God at this point has led him to these conclusions. Now, he's got his three friends, right? He's got Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, right? And they're here to help. Have you ever had a friend help you through a time of trouble or something tragic in your life? So after Job speaks out for a couple of chapters here, Eliphaz steps in and says, will you be patient and let me say a word? For who could keep from speaking out? What's Eliphaz saying here? Is he being sarcastic? Hey, you got time for me to catch a word in edgewise here? With all you've said, I can't help but correct you. Eliphaz continues, my experience shows that those who plant trouble and cultivate evil will harvest the same. A breath from God destroys them. They vanish in a blast of anger. What's Eliphaz saying here? Again, God rewards those who are good and follow him and punishes those that are evil or have sinned. So he says, my experience shows that those who plant trouble and cultivate evil harvest the same. In other words, you reap what you sow. What he's basically saying is God only destroys the wicked, and and what we find here is a structure here. We've got Job speaks, then Eliphaz speaks, then Job rebuts, then Bildad speaks, then Job rebuts, then Zophar speaks, then Job speaks again, and they repeat this process, this cycle 3 times. So after Eliphaz accused Job of, he's not really accusing Job of actually sinning, but the evidence points in that direction. He continues, but consider the joy of those corrected by God. Do not despise the discipline of the Almighty when you sin. In other words, he says, Job, you're saying you're blameless, you're saying you're righteous, you say you can't figure anything that you've done wrong, but my experience says that God only punishes the sinners, and what's going on in your life, don't despise the Almighty when you sin. In other words, you got to figure out what you did wrong. Next up, after Job's response to Eliphaz, Bildad says, how long will you go on like this? You sound like blustering wind. What's Bildad accusing Job of? Just, you're talking too much. You're talking a lot, but you're saying nothing. And here's a question that Bildad poses to Job. Does God twist justice? Does the Almighty twist what is right? Now these are the friends, right? These are the friends that are here to help. Verse 4, he says, your children must have sinned against him, so their punishment was well deserved. What's he saying? What's Bildad saying? Your children must have sinned, otherwise they wouldn't be dead. How often do we speak for God to others around us and just mess the whole situation up? That's quite a statement from Bildad, right? But see, this is also the thinking of the time. Again, God rewards the good and punishes the evil. Bildad continues, but if you pray to God and seek the favor of the Almighty, and you are pure and live with integrity, he will surely rise up and restore your happy home. What's he saying? If you just turn your life around and live better, if you live righteously, if you do all the right things, God will restore what you have, and you'll be happy again. How do we present God? Do we present God as a Santa Claus who gives us the things we want when we do what we're supposed to be doing? Okay, Job then again responds for a couple of chapters. You got to understand, there is we stopped last week after going over 2 chapters, and from the 3rd chapter on through the 38th chapter, this is back and forth between the 3 friends and Job here. So far, our 3rd friend steps up. Who'd like to?
Should I remain silent while you babble on? When you mock God, shouldn't someone make you ashamed? You claim, my beliefs are pure, and I am clean in the sight of God.
Okay, so far saying, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, you, Job, say that you are, I don't know of any sin, but you must have sinned because, well, just look at you. So far as thinking goes along with everybody else's at the time of that God is punishing Job for some sin that he must have committed. Again, were they trying to understand Job's point of view? Or were they just going about what they saw? Who's next? Green light on?
Get rid of your sins and leave all iniquity behind you. Then your face will brighten with innocence. You will be strong and free of fear.
Okay, again, Zophar saying, get rid of your sins. In other words, Job, you must have sinned, and leave all the iniquity behind you. Leave all the bad things you're doing. Don't do them anymore. Do we tell people this? Do we tell other Christians this? Then your face will brighten with innocence, and you'll be strong and free of fear. Now, what's he saying here? Just turn your life around, do good, and good things will happen to you. Do bad things happen to good people? I think, just look around us. It happens every day. So does living a righteous life guarantee no setbacks will occur in your life? No, correct. So to sum up the 3 friends and their argument against Job is God is just. Is this true? Is God a God of justice? Absolutely he is. And that God runs the world according to justice. Is that true? See, I want you to think. I want you to understand what's going on here. So their thought was God runs the world according to justice. So the conclusion is Job must have sinned. Their whole argument through all those chapters was the same thing. You may not know it, but you must have sinned. Things have happened in your life, and it's God just being good and just and handing out the results of your sinning. Job continues.
Far be it from me that I should say you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. My heart shall not reproach me as long as I live.
What's Job's argument to his 3 friends? Verse 6, my righteousness I hold fast and will not let go. My heart shall not be reproach me as long as I live. He continues in 32 verse 1. Job's basically saying, there's no sin I can see in my life. I don't know why this is happening to me. In 32:1, it says, so these 3 men ceased answering Job, the 3 friends, because he was righteous in his own eyes. Was he righteous in his own eyes? He didn't know of any sin in his life. I don't know if he considered himself righteous, but You know, the three friends could not answer any of Job's, the way Job was framing his arguments, but they also wouldn't change their assumption of God. So they had a view of Job and they had a view of God, and they wouldn't try to see how those two related. Sure.
Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God.
Okay, so we have Elihu. Who's Elihu? Where'd he come from? We didn't see him when the three friends arrived, right? So when does Elihu show up? We don't know, but he must have been listening to what was going on here, because we find out later he condemns Job, and he also condemns the three friends for their line of reasoning here. So we have here, and what I mentioned earlier is when we got to Job, we don't have any of the lineage listed. So Job was not an Israelite. Job was, a worshiper of God, but now and the three friends have no lineage either. Now we get to Elihu, and he's the son of, what does anybody know what Elihu is? A good Hebrew name. It means he is my God. And the son of Barachel. So we have lineage here. He's someone's son. And the father's name means God blesses. And also he's a Buzite, which identifies that Eli is from the family of Nahor, Abraham's brother. So we have ancestry here. We have lineage here. So we're assuming that Elihu was a good Israelite and just was quiet because he was younger than the three older friends. And if you read into that, you'll see that. So when the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job, his wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. Why is Elihu upset? Because Job's line of reasoning was that I'm innocent and God's doing this because he thinks I'm sinning. Also, this is Elihu still, also against his three friends, his wrath was aroused because they found no answer and yet condemned Job. So the problem with Elihu had was that was this. He says to Job, "Look, in this you are not righteous. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? For he does not give accounting of any of his words." What's Job saying here? It says, Job, basically your theology is messed up. And how in the world can you contend against God? Can any of us bring charges against God? Can any of us go to God and challenge our condition in life? How would that even, how could you even consider such a thing? Surely God will never do wickedly, nor will the Almighty pervert justice. What's Elihu's conclusion when it comes to Job? That God is God, and he is a righteous and just God, and he will never pervert justice. So Elihu's, basically the summation of Elihu's arguments or complaint is this: that one, Job is wrong; that two, the three friends are wrong about Job; and that God is God. God does what God does. And then he continues, does a man have the right to complain against God? Do we complain against God? Honesty, yes. I was going to say, raise your hand if you've never complained against God, and I'd be surprised to see a hand raised. So what's the conclusion? God does what he thinks is best with no reason given. Is that a satisfactory answer? So after Elihu speaks, Job doesn't get a chance to respond because God responds. God uses 4 chapters in the book of Job to reveal himself to Job and the 3 friends. And we're going to get a couple of snippets here. In Job 38, 1 and 2, this is the Lord speaking here. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" What's God saying here? You don't know what you're talking about. You're spouting off all this theology, and you really don't understand what's going on. And let me see, what's the next one? Again, after Job 38, if you actually get the chance to read it, I would recommend it highly. That God goes through all of who He is. God wants Job to consider the creation, everything that God has made. Can man make anything? Not like God. He wants Job to consider God's goodness and His power and His wisdom. He wants Job to think about all the attributes of God that he hasn't considered, and also this. In 40 verse 1 and 2, "Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, Shall the one who contend with the Almighty correct him? He who rebukes God, let him answer." Basically, God's saying, if you think you're smart enough to challenge my wisdom, then you must be smart enough to know why God does something. You understand the circular logic there? If you can challenge me, you must have an answer already. Otherwise, you shouldn't be challenging God. Satan had predicted that Job would curse God. He did not. But Job did try to tell God what to do. We never do that, do we? We don't, in our prayers, tell God what He needs to do. Okay, that's a rhetorical. No answers, please. Job finally gets it.
Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who it is who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know.
What's Job saying here? After all of this 40 chapters of back and forth between trying to debate God, what was Job's original question? Why are you doing this to me, right? Do we have an answer? No, we don't have an answer why things happen in our lives. How often do we try to explain what God does in someone else's life or in our own life? How often do we unintentionally misrepresent God to other people and explain, oh, God must be doing this because of this. And this is what was going on between Job and the four people he was contending with. But God does get Job to think about who God is, and I think that's where we need to be. So Job changes his mind from I'm innocent to I don't know all the reasons for why you do your things. Job admits his ignorance. He says, I don't understand why you do what you do. But what has happened to Job? He's climbed the ladder from despair to faith. In other words, first his focus is on what? His condition, right? What had happened to him, his family, and himself. He didn't understand why, but then he didn't understand God either. So in the long run, Job went from I want you to explain a courtroom scene to, okay, God, I trust you. I believe in who you are. And even though I don't understand what's going on in my life, I do want you to continue. I will continue to worship you. I will continue to be faithful to you. And that's where we need to be as well. Sometimes we don't understand what's going on in our lives. We don't understand what's happening to either us or a loved one or whoever it may be. But do we trust God? Do we have faith in God enough to believe that He wants the best for us? That, the Bible tells us God is love. Do we believe that? Do we live our lives like that? And that's what we need to do. Thank you. Our closing song, please.